The pivotal moment unfolded precisely 47 minutes into what had been meticulously orchestrated as Nancy Pelosi's coronation as America's venerable elder stateswoman, a sequence of events designed to elevate her above the partisan fray and position her as the wise matriarch of democracy, the singular adult in the room and the reasonable voice who had dedicated decades to the noble struggle against corruption and authoritarianism and all the detrimental actions associated with nefarious actors. She had spent weeks in rigorous preparation, rehearsing her talking points with her extensive staff, practicing her facial expressions in the mirror to perfect that signature condescending smile. She was famous for the one that projected a sentiment of, "I possess vastly more knowledge than you poor, ignorant soul," and refining the sarcastic applause from the 2019 State of the Union that had transformed into a liberal rallying cry, mastering the perfect amalgamation of dismissiveness and superiority that had rendered her a hero to millions who believed politics was essentially about making the opposition feel intellectually inferior. She labored under the impression that she was walking into a genial 90-minute conversation, a town hall format explicitly designed to demonstrate bipartisanship and healing, and all those harmonious concepts that resonate so well in press releases, envisioning herself and Donald Trump seated across from one another in comfortable chairs, with a neutral moderator posing softball questions, accompanied by a carefully divided audience that would provide her ample opportunities to appear reasonable while he appeared unhinged, a task she viewed as effortless, given that she had been navigating these waters for 40 years and knew exactly how to command a room, how to deliver a stinging witticism while maintaining that grandmotherly smile, and how to make cutting remarks appear as profound wisdom. What she remained blissfully unaware of was that Donald Trump had spent the preceding 6 months quietly facilitating the declassification of documents, compiling stock trade records, gathering congressional testimony, analyzing meeting schedules, and cross-referencing communications between her office and the various corporations her husband had invested in, alongside property records and donor lists matched against legislative votes and every financial disclosure form she had filed for 4 decades. All of it declassified, compiled, organized, and ready for deployment. She believed she was entering the arena as the prosecutor, much like she had been during both impeachment proceedings, the one posing the difficult inquiries, the one leveling the accusations, and the one placing him on trial before the American public, having absolutely no conception that she was about to be exposed as the precise embodiment of what she had spent 40 years accusing others of being, a corrupt, self-serving career politician who had amassed obscene wealth while feigning a fight for the common man, someone who resided in a palatial mansion while her constituents languished in tents, and someone who generated millions through stock trades while lecturing billionaires on the subject of greed. Furthermore, Trump possessed the receipts, not vague accusations or standard political attacks, but actual documented evidence, including dates, specific dollar amounts, stock purchase records, profit margins, and property values, utilizing timeline after timeline to demonstrate suspicious coincidences that ceased to be coincidental when viewed in the aggregate, all stored on his phone, on flash drives, and in folders, ready to be displayed on the massive screen behind them, where 85 million Americans could witness the evidence firsthand. Because this was not a standard debate, but a live town hall, with no commercial breaks. 90 minutes of uninterrupted coverage with cameras fixed on both of them the entire time, rendering every facial expression visible, every evasion obvious, and every stammered non-answer captured in high definition with nowhere to hide. At this precise juncture, 47 minutes in, Trump was retrieving his phone to display a chart detailing Paul Pelosi's NVIDIA stock purchase, $5.2 million, bought 3 weeks prior to major AI legislation that Nancy had championed, legislation that subsequently sent NVIDIA's stock soaring, resulting in a $5.2 million profit on a single trade. And the chart was projected onto the big screen with the timeline crystal clear, showing the purchase date, the legislative announcement date, the stock price jump, and the calculated profit. Behind them, the production team had generated a split screen featuring the NVIDIA chart on one side and, on the other, that famous image from 2019 of Nancy Pelosi at the State of the Union, delivering her sarcastic clap to Trump, capturing that smug, superior expression that had made her a meme, creating a perfect juxtaposition of her signature moment of arrogance next to evidence that she and her husband had generated millions through what bore a striking resemblance to insider trading. In real time, Nancy Pelosi's face was undergoing a transformation rarely seen on television, shifting from confident to confused, to pale, and finally, to something approaching panic, in the span of about 3 seconds, because she realized in this frozen moment, with 85 million people watching, that she had walked into a trap and that Trump had not been distracted when he repeatedly checked his phone during the initial segment of the town hall. Rather, he had been waiting, allowing her to become comfortable, permitting her to perform her superior elder stateswoman routine, letting her make subtle jabs about his wealth and his businesses and his corruption, waiting for the perfect instant to flip the script. And that moment had now arrived just as she finished a brief speech about how some individuals utilized their positions for personal gain and enriched themselves while pretending to serve the public, asserting that America required leaders who genuinely cared about working families rather than just their bank accounts. It was a well-delivered speech, the sort of rhetoric that would typically garner applause and approving nods and be circulated as clips on MSNBC, except that Trump had responded by retrieving his phone and demonstrating to everyone exactly how Nancy Pelosi and her husband had secured over $5 million in a single stock trade based on legislation she had influenced, asking very simply if Nancy wanted to discuss personal gain. To fully comprehend how we arrived at this moment, at this frozen second, where Nancy Pelosi's carefully crafted image began to crumble on live television, we must rewind not far, merely to the beginning, 90 minutes earlier, when she still believed this was destined to be her victory lap. The State of Unity Town Hall had been scheduled for months as a joint project by the major networks designed to demonstrate that American democracy could still function, that leaders from both parties could engage in civil conversations, and that healing was possible. Although neither Trump nor Pelosi initially desired to participate, the pressure was enormous, with both parties pushing and the media demanding it, while the public supposedly craved it, leading both to finally agree under specific conditions: a live broadcast, a neutral moderator, an audience split exactly 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans, verified by independent polling, no debate rules, just conversation for 90 minutes, with no commercial breaks, and a provision that both candidates could bring whatever materials they desired. That final stipulation regarding materials should have served as a red flag for Pelosi's team. Yet they were so confident in her ability to out-talk, outsmart, and out-grandmother Trump that they failed to consider what he might bring to the table. The set was designed to appear friendly, featuring 2 comfortable armchairs facing each other at a slight angle with a small table between them holding water bottles, while the moderator, James Reed, a respected news anchor known for fairness, sat slightly off to the side, and the audience was arranged in a semicircle around them, close enough to feel intimate, but distant enough to remain out of the way, creating an atmosphere resembling a conversation in someone's living room, except this living room had cameras everywhere, and, an audience of 85 million people watching at 7 p.m. Eastern. The moderator, James Reed, opened the broadcast by wishing America a good evening and explaining that tonight they were attempting something different. No debate podiums, no strict time limits, no rapid-fire questions, just a conversation between two individuals who had shaped American politics for decades and who, despite their profound differences, had agreed to sit down together and talk before gesturing to his left to introduce President Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States and current president in his second term. Trump nodded, dressed in his customary dark suit and red tie, but his demeanor was unusually calm, almost relaxed, with his phone resting on the armrest beside him and a thin folder on the table, appearing like someone settling in for a friendly chat. Reed then gestured to the right to introduce Leader Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House, representing California's 11th District for 37 years, and one of the most influential legislators in modern American history. Pelosi smiled, her practiced smile, the grandmotherly expression, dressed in her signature bright colors with a purple suit and a gold brooch, her hands folded neatly in her lap, presenting the picture of dignified leadership. Reed thanked them both for being there and proposed starting simply by asking Leader Pelosi, who had been in public service for nearly 4 decades, what brought her there that night. Pelosi took a small breath, having rehearsed this answer 50 times until it was perfect, warm, wise, with just a hint of concern about the state of the nation, and stated that she had dedicated her life to public service, fighting for working families, for those who lacked a voice in the halls of power, and for children who deserved a better future, expressing her belief that even in these divided times, common ground could be found and healing was possible. She glanced at Trump with a look that was subtle but clear to anyone watching, adding that even with difficult people, even with those who had tested institutions, she had always believed in the possibility of redemption, and the possibility that even those who had made mistakes and put their own interests above the country could learn, grow, and become better. The Democratic side of the audience applauded, recognizing this as the Nancy they loved, wise, compassionate, and taking the high road, while making it absolutely clear she considered Trump beneath her. Reed turned to Trump for his thoughts, and Trump smiled, not his rally smile full of teeth and energy, but a smaller, almost amused expression, noting that Nancy and he had known each other a long time and had their disagreements, pausing as chuckles erupted from both sides, because disagreements was perhaps the understatement of the century, but adding that he respected that she had been in the game a long time, had been very successful, and had done very well for herself. That last phrase hung in the air for just a second, done very well for herself, which could have been a compliment, but coming from Trump, and delivered in that specific manner, possessed just enough of an edge to provoke wonder, causing Pelosi's smile to tighten almost imperceptibly. Trump continued by suggesting that tonight they should discuss real issues affecting real Americans, the things that actually mattered to people, not political games or who could deliver the best speech, but real substance. Reed nodded and suggested diving into the economy, inflation, and the cost of living, as these were top concerns for Americans, asking for the president's thoughts on his administration's policies. And so they were off, with the first 20 minutes proceeding in a fairly normal fashion, with questions about inflation, immigration, and energy policy, during which Pelosi performed her standard routine, talking about fighting for working families, about the middle class that had been squeezed for decades, and about how some people glancing at Trump inherited wealth and didn't understand what it meant to struggle, emphasizing the need for billionaires to pay their fair share, all delivered in that grandmotherly voice that was concerned, reasonable, and just asking for fairness. Trump responded with policy talk, citing numbers about economic growth, unemployment, and wage gains, remaining surprisingly measured and not engaging in his rally routine or taking the personal bait, acting almost professional, which was weird to Pelosi, who kept making little digs, expecting him to explode or go off on tangents, only to see him redirect to policy, results, and data. Something was off. This wasn't the Trump she knew, the one who couldn't resist a fight or react to every provocation. And what she didn't realize was that he was setting the trap, being calm and reasonable to let her establish herself as the reasonable one, the adult, and the person with moral authority, because when he eventually flipped the script, the contrast would be devastating. 23 minutes in, the first crack appeared when an audience member stood up, a young woman in her late 20s who stated her question was for Leader Pelosi, explaining that she lived in San Francisco, having moved there 5 years ago for a tech job. While she loved the city, it had gotten significantly worse, with homeless encampments everywhere, open drug use, human waste on the sidewalks, car break-ins, and her friends leaving, asking why, after Pelosi had represented San Francisco for 37 years, it hadn't improved, but had instead deteriorated so severely. The question was respectful but pointed, striking at Pelosi's weakest spot, her district, the city she had represented for 4 decades, the city that had become a national symbol of progressive policy failure. Pelosi's smile didn't waver, as she had answered this question many times before, responding by appreciating the concern, but explaining that these were complex systemic issues involving income inequality driven by billionaires who didn't pay their fair share, corporate greed, pricing, working families out of their homes, Republican obstruction at the state and federal level, preventing real solutions, housing policies that hadn't kept up with population growth, and the opioid crisis for which pharmaceutical companies bore enormous responsibility. She continued for almost 3 minutes, discussing root causes and systemic problems and the need for comprehensive solutions and more federal funding, blaming everyone, billionaires, corporations, Republicans, pharmaceutical companies, housing developers, everyone except the one person who had actually been in charge of representing that district for 37 years. When she finally finished, there was polite applause from the Democratic side, but the young woman who asked the question was frowning because that wasn't really an answer. It was a list of excuses. Trump, who had been listening quietly and checking his phone occasionally, looked up and asked if he could ask Nancy something, surprising her as he usually interrupted rather than asking permission. He confirmed she had been in Congress since 1987, which was 37 years representing San Francisco, essentially the same district despite some boundary changes, and asked what her district looked like when she started. Pelosi's eyes narrowed slightly, wondering where this was going, and remarked that she thought the question was overly simplistic, to which Trump replied, "Humor me," noting that he had built buildings in cities his whole life, and knew something about urban issues, asking again what had changed in her district in 37 years. When Pelosi dismissed him saying he wouldn't understand the complexities of urban governance, Trump said, "Try me," pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and the big screen behind them lit up with video introduced as "The Tenderloin Today," this week, shot by local news. The footage played, showing homeless tents lining entire blocks, people openly injecting drugs on the sidewalk, human feces visible on the concrete, broken needles in the gutter, boarded-up businesses with for lease signs in the windows, and people stepping over unconscious bodies on their way to work. It was devastating, raw, and undeniable, not footage from conservative media with an agenda, but from local San Francisco news in her own city and district. The audience watched in silence, and even the Democrats looked uncomfortable as Trump let it play for 30 seconds before tapping his phone again to show San Francisco in 1987, the year she took office, displaying different footage from old film that was grainy but clear enough to show Golden Gate Park filled with families having picnics, clean streets in the financial district, Fisherman's Wharf bustling with tourists, small businesses thriving, children playing in neighborhood parks, and people walking freely without fear. The contrast was brutal, and Trump let both videos sit on the split screen for a moment before speaking in a conversational, almost curious voice, noting that homelessness in her district was up 400% since she took office, drug overdose deaths were up 800%, and business closures in the Tenderloin and surrounding areas were up 60%, just in the past decade, citing these as official city statistics from San Francisco's own reports, all occurring in the district she had represented for almost 40 years, while supposedly fighting for the people. Pelosi opened her mouth to respond, but Trump wasn't done, adding that he wasn't cherry-picking and proceeded to show other cities for comparison. Austin, Texas, which also grew massively and became a tech hub, had homelessness up 40%, which was bad, but not 400. Nashville, Tennessee, a growing city with new businesses, had homelessness up 32%. Portland had problems too, but they were talking about her district and her responsibility. He put his phone down and stated that San Francisco was special, especially bad. And since she had been in charge the whole time, he was just curious what had happened and what she had done for 37 years, while her city fell apart. The room was silent, with cameras tight on Pelosi's face, her smile now frozen and forced, as she retorted that this was exactly what he always did. Oversimplify complex issues and ignore the broader economic forces that hit Austin and Nashville, but somehow hit San Francisco 10 times harder, accusing him of cherry-picking statistics to distract from his own record of corruption and her allegations of his corruption. Trump's eyebrows went up, and that amused smile returned as he suggested, "Let's talk about corruption. Let's talk about how you got rich, Nancy." And just like that, the trap was sprung. The audience leaned forward, recognizing this was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the gloves coming off. Reed, the moderator, looked concerned and suggested maintaining a respectful tone. But Trump countered that he was being respectful by asking a legitimate question, noting that Nancy had been in Congress for 37 years, with a salary that never exceeded $223,000, even as Speaker, which was public record, yet her net worth was estimated at $200 million, with some estimates saying $240 million, which was a lot of money for someone on a government salary their whole life. And he was just curious how that happened. Pelosi had her rehearsed answer ready, having been asked this before by conservative media, stating that her husband, Paul, was a very successful businessman and investor who had built his wealth over decades through smart investments and hard work, adding that she was very proud of him. Trump repeated successful investor, nodding and agreeing that he was indeed very successful, then proposed talking about that success as he picked up his phone again and tapped it. The screen behind them changed to display a chart, a timeline with dates and descriptions of stock purchases on the left, and dates and descriptions of legislative actions or government announcements on the right, with lines connecting them. The first entry showed December 2020. Paul Pelosi buys $5 million in Tesla call options. January 2021. Biden administration announces major electric vehicle initiative and infrastructure bill with EV charging stations. Tesla stock soars, resulting in a profit of $3.2 million. The audience could read it. The timeline was clear, and the connection was obvious. Coincidence? Trump asked, his voice mild, claiming he was just asking. Pelosi's smile was gone now as she stated she did not discuss her husband's private investments and had no involvement in his trading decisions. Trump continued, pulling up another chart showing December 2021. Paul buys 4.5 million in Microsoft stock. January 2022. Pentagon awards Microsoft a $22 billion contract for cloud services, noting she sat on a committee that had to approve that contract. Microsoft stock up 25%. Paul makes 1.1 million. He looked at her and asked, "Another coincidence?" As she called it, a witch hunt? He continued with June 2020. Disney stock, $2 million. July 2020. She champions COVID relief legislation that particularly benefits the entertainment industry. Disney stock recovers. Profit, 1.7 million. Another chart appeared showing March 2021. Nvidia stock, 3.5 million. April 2021. She publicly champions artificial intelligence regulation in a way that favors certain companies, including Nvidia. Stock up 60%, profit 5.2 million. Then July 2021. Alphabet, Google's parent company, $6 million in stock. August 2021. She publicly opposes antitrust legislation that would have broken up big tech companies. Google's stock stabilizes and rises. Profit 2.8 million. Trump put down his phone, and on the screen behind them was a full chart, a comprehensive list of Paul Pelosi's major stock trades during Nancy's time in leadership, with each trade next to the legislative action or government announcement that affected that stock, and the profit, the bottom line highlighted, documented timing-related profits from trades during NY's leadership. 42 million. Trump, his voice still conversational and just asking questions, remarked that in the private sector they called this insider trading, noting her husband had a really special talent for buying stocks right before things she knew about happened, things that moved markets, and doing it over and over with a success rate on options trades of 76%. He asked if she knew what Warren Buffett's success rate was, and when Pelosi said nothing, he answered 68%, pointing out that her husband beat the best investor in the history of the world by 8 points, essentially performing better than the Oracle of Omaha, and asked what his secret was. The audience was riveted, with half nodding and half looking shocked, all watching Pelosi's hands gripping the armrest as she declared this a coordinated attack, insisting these were public records, and her husband's trades were disclosed. Trump countered that the dates were facts, the legislative actions were facts, and the profits were calculated from public stock prices, reiterating he wasn't attacking, but just asking how her husband knew what to buy and when. Reid tried to intervene, stating these trades were legal under current law. But Trump turned to him and asked who wrote that law and who had opposed every single bill to ban congressional stock trading, pointing to the person sitting right there and wondering if her opposition was related to the $42 million, the mansions, the private jets, and the Napa Vineyard. He turned back to Pelosi, noting she lectured billionaires about paying their fair share, about greed, and about corruption. Yet she made $42 million on stock trades that just happened to come right before things she knew were going to happen because of her position, asking how that was not corruption. For the first time in the town hall, Nancy Pelosi had no smooth answer, no prepared response, and no condescending smile with a perfect grandmotherly comeback. She just stared at the chart on the screen, at the timeline that was impossible to explain away, and at the numbers that spoke for themselves. Sensing the moment, Trump went in for more, telling her gently that he wanted to show her something else, reminding her of an interview she did during COVID in her kitchen. The screen changed to show a clip from 2020 of Nancy Pelosi in a massive, gleaming, professional-grade kitchen that looked like it belonged in a five-star restaurant, showing off not one but two enormous stainless steel, sub-zero refrigerators filled with designer ice cream, saying, "I think we all deserve a treat," as she pulled out pints of Jenny's splendid ice creams, which cost $12 each. The camera panned across marble countertops that looked like they cost more than most people's cars, professional-grade appliances, and custom cabinets, while at the bottom of the screen, Trump's production team had added a caption, "Sub-Zero refrigerator $24,000 each. Total $48,000. Trump noted that the interview went viral, but not in a good way, because when she showed off her expensive ice cream and $48,000 refrigerators, 22 million Americans were unemployed because of COVID lockdowns, millions couldn't pay rent or feed their kids, and she was showing off gourmet ice cream in her mansion. He tapped his phone again, splitting the screen to show Pelosi's mansion kitchen on the left and a homeless encampment on the right, asking if she wanted to know where that was, pointing to the encampment in the Tenderloin district, just 2.3 miles from her house, a 15-minute drive, both in her district. The contrast was obscene. Pelosi in her marble and stainless palace, and people living in tents surrounded by trash and needles 15 minutes away. He emphasized that she had represented these people for 37 years. And this is what happened. They got tents, and she got $48,000 refrigerators. Pelosi tried to fight back, calling this an attack on a successful woman. But Trump firmly stated no. It was asking how she became successful, noting he built towers, created jobs, and risked his own money on projects, offering to show every building with his name on it, asking how she made her money trading stocks using information her position gave her. He wasn't yelling or being bombastic, just asking the question calmly, which made it harder to dismiss. He continued to the vineyard, mentioning her beautiful property in Napa with a current $25 million valuation, bought in 2008 for $3.5 million, and asked if she knew what else happened in 2008. When Pelosi said nothing, Trump pulled out actual documents, property records, showing she bought that vineyard the same year she championed legislation protecting the wine industry from certain federal taxes, with the vote happening in July and the purchase in September. Very convenient timing. He showed another document identifying the seller as a developer named Richard Benson, who, at the time, was in San Francisco, trying to get approval for a massive development project requiring zoning changes and permits, changes she voted for, which was also very convenient. He noted the vineyard's current value represented a 600% return in 15 years, all while she had been in Congress claiming to fight income inequality. He leaned forward and asked her, since she lectured billionaires about paying their fair share, what her fair share was, and how much tax she paid on that vineyard appreciation, on her stock gains, and on her husband's perfectly timed trades. The moderator tried to move to another topic, but Pelosi made her fatal mistake. Instead of letting it go or pivoting, she tried to attack back, demanding to talk about his corruption and January 6th, the insurrection she claimed he incited, and the people who died because of his lies. Trump smiled because she had just walked into the biggest trap of all, saying, "Oh good, let's talk about January 6th, as he pulled out his phone again. This time, official Department of Defense documents appeared on screen, declassified and stamped with official seals. He read from a memo dated January 3rd, 2021, 3 days before January 6th, sent from the Department of Defense to her office, to Nancy as Speaker of the House, stating, "At the direction of the President, the Department of Defense is prepared to deploy up to 10,000 National Guard troops to the Capitol complex to ensure security for the January 6th electoral certification. Please advise if this deployment is requested. He then read her office's response from January 4th. Deployment not necessary at this time. Concerned about optics of military presence. He looked at her and stated he offered 10,000 troops. She said no, the Capitol got breached, and she blamed him. Pelosi shook her head, claiming it was taken completely out of context. But Trump asked what context, reiterating he offered military protection which she rejected because of optics, and when the security she was responsible for failed, she blamed him and launched a committee to investigate him. More documents appeared regarding the January 6th committee she handpicked, excluding Republicans Kevin McCarthy wanted, destroying evidence, and suppressing testimony. He showed new documents, marked declassified in red stamps, including video footage showing Capitol police officers removing barriers and waving protesters toward the building videos. Her committee deleted and didn't include in the report, and phone records showing coordination between her staff and media outlets before the committee even started, proving they buried testimony from security officials saying she personally refused additional security. Trump's voice hardened as he accused her of running a show trial, destroying evidence that didn't fit her narrative, suppressing witnesses who contradicted her story, excluding Republicans who might ask uncomfortable questions, and calling it a search for truth. He held up the declassification documents, stating he spent 6 months getting all of this declassified, every denied request for security, every piece of buried evidence, every unheard witness, and it was all public now, posted online an hour before the town hall started for anyone to read. Pelosi's face had gone from red to pale. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. January 6th was supposed to be her trump card, her moral high ground. Yet, he had official documents showing she refused troops, and her committee suppressed evidence. Trump asked if she wanted to talk about corruption, about rigging the system and destroying evidence, noting she literally ran a congressional committee that deleted video footage because it contradicted her narrative, calling it a cover-up of her own security failures. The audience was stunned into silence. Even supportive Democrats didn't know what to say, because Trump wasn't just making accusations. He was showing official government documents with seals. Pelosi had no response, no explanation for refusing the National Guard, no defense for destroying evidence. Trump went in for the kill, his voice conversational and almost friendly again, noting that for 40 years she positioned herself as the defender of truth and the fighter against corruption, while greedy billionaires destroyed America. He picked up his phone to review what they had learned tonight, counting on his fingers. 1. She represented San Francisco for 37 years, and it became one of the richest, most unequal cities with homelessness up 400% and small businesses closing. 2. She made $223,000 a year, but was worth $200 million, with her husband making perfectly timed stock trades totaling $42 million in documented profits while she opposed bans on congressional trading. 3. She lived in a mansion, owned a $25 million vineyard, and showed off expensive ice cream while millions were unemployed. 4. She refused National Guard security for January 6th, blamed him, and ran a committee that destroyed evidence. He looked directly at her and stated that everything she accused him of, corruption, self-dealing, rigging the system, destroying evidence, caring more about power than people she had actually done, provably and documentedly, with receipts. He smiled a sad smile and asked what the word was for accusing others of exactly what one is guilty of, answering himself, projection. The audience reaction was instantaneous, with gasps and murmurs. Even some Democrats nodded, because, regardless of their politics, Trump had just spent an hour showing documents, proving Nancy Pelosi got rich while her constituents got poor, and she had no answer. Trump leaned forward, his voice quieter and more serious, stating he built buildings, created jobs, and risked his own money in the private sector before politics, taking a dollar salary as president, whereas she became a nine-figure millionaire on a government salary, representing one of the poorest districts, asking simply, "Between the two of us sitting here tonight, who's actually corrupt?" The silence was absolute. Nobody moved or breathed. Pelosi finally spoke, her voice shaking, calling it character assassination and selective use of facts. Asserting she spent her life in public service, Trump interrupted, agreeing she had, but adding she got very rich doing it while her city fell apart, which wasn't character assassination, just facts. He held up his phone one last time to show a new chart, listing top donors to her campaigns and PACs on the left, and Paul Pelosi's stock trades on the right, showing they were almost dollar for dollar the same companies, suggesting these companies knew she would help them with legislation, and her husband knew which ones to invest in. He set the phone down and asked her to tell him that was a coincidence, that it was all just random chance. Nancy Pelosi, who had spent 40 years perfecting the art of political combat, had absolutely nothing to say, because the documents spoke for themselves. The coincidences weren't coincidences when viewed together. She sat there silent while 85 million people watched. And Donald Trump had won, not with insults or bombast, but with receipts. The remaining 43 minutes were painful to watch, as Pelosi gave hollow, defensive answers. Her grandmother act evaporated, looking small and diminished. Trump stayed measured, letting the evidence sit on the screen. In closing statements, Pelosi weakly stood by her record, but Trump simply said he showed the documents, the stock trades, the timelines, the mansion versus the tents, and the 42 million in profits, telling the people to judge who had been honest and who had been playing them for fools. When time was called, Pelosi walked off immediately without shaking hands, while Trump stayed and looked relaxed. The next 2 hours were bedlam. Clips exploded on every social media platform, with the stock trading timeline getting 94 million views and the split screen of the kitchen versus the encampment getting 112 million. Conservative media celebrated the receipts, while liberal media struggled to defend her against official documents and stock records. The Washington Post fact-checked Trump's claims as mostly accurate. Social media was brutal, with Pelosi portfolio trending #1. The young woman who asked the San Francisco question became a hero. By midnight, every major newspaper covered the story. The following week was a political earthquake with 15 ethics complaints filed, a liberal watchdog group filing FOIA requests, and a grassroots movement in San Francisco to recall supervisors. Within 10 days, a bill to ban congressional stock trading had 280 co-sponsors and passed within a month, with Pelosi forced to vote yes. Her approval rating in San Francisco dropped to 34%. The Wall Street Journal published a statistical analysis, finding Paul Pelosi's trades had a 0.04% probability of happening by chance. Investigative journalists dug into the Napa Vineyard fraud investigation. HBO announced a documentary, The Pelosi Portfolio, which Pelosi tried to block but failed. It later won an Emmy. 3 months after the town hall, Pelosi announced she would not seek leadership positions. 2 weeks later, a primary challenger, Katie Morrison, an attorney from the Tenderloin, announced her candidacy and raised $4.7 million in 3 weeks. Early polling showed Morrison leading by 19 points. By month 6, Pelosi announced she wouldn't seek re-election, choosing to retire rather than lose. Katie Morrison won the seat. The town hall had destroyed Pelosi systematically, with evidence that couldn't be spun. 1 year later, Trump told an interviewer he didn't destroy her. He just showed the receipts. And she destroyed her own career by being corrupt for 40 years and thinking nobody would notice. He emphasized that the receipts matter. The town hall became a cultural moment taught in business, law, and journalism schools as a case study in ethics and brand management. Pelosi became a cautionary tale about hypocrisy. Her Wikipedia page was updated to include sections on the stock trading scandal and the town hall. Her legacy changed from a powerful speaker to a politician who enriched herself while her district deteriorated. She fell not to a scandal or an opponent, but to her own documented record shown to 85 million people in real time with receipts.